I want to talk to you today in regard to the example that was given to us by the Church of Macedonia in regard to faith promise giving. To faith promise giving. We hear a lot discussed in churches about the importance of faith promise giving. So I want to give you some points this afternoon in regard to this very, very important subject of faith promise giving. Now, I hesitate to even discuss this subject because it is a very sensitive subject with many people, especially in regard to churches, and that is the subject of finances and the subject of money. But as the truth be told, the two most important subjects that Christ taught about while here on this earth was the subject of hell, and secondly, money. Because money will determine your heart. Where you spend your money will determine your priorities in life. If I was to look at your checkbook, I could determine the things that you love the most in your life. So I want to give you a couple of points as introduction, and then I'm going to give you some other points as well. No person can give to God until he or she is faithful in their tithing. So here's a question, and that is, what is the tithe? The answer is simply this. The answer is that the tithe is a tenth of all of your increase. It is a tenth of all of your increase. That means you tithe, you give your 10% from your gross income, not your net. But here is an excuse that many use not to tithe, and that is that tithing began with the law and ended with the law. Now, here are some examples of why that is incorrect. There is Abraham in Genesis chapter 14 of where he tithed. There's Jacob in Genesis 28 of where he tithed. Now, those commandments or those illustrations that are given here are from individuals, men of the Old Testament, that tithed before the law. Now, you say, but we live in the day of grace, so we live in the day of the New Testament, so we should be able to give by grace and not necessarily by a command. Well, I see nothing in the New Testament that forbids us from giving of the tithe. Now, here is some examples, some points that I want to give you in regard to the Macedonian church. The first thing is this. Their example of giving was precious. Their example of giving was precious. Why was it precious? Because they were giving in spite of their suffering. We see that in 2 Corinthians 8, verse 2, how it says, how that in a great trial of affliction, the abundance of their joy and their deep poverty abounded unto the riches of their liberality. So they gave in spite of a great trial of affliction. The next thing is this. They were a great example in their pattern of their giving. In chapter 8, verse 3, it says, for they gave according to their means, as I can testify, and beyond their means of their own accord, or to their power. See, the Macedonians knew what it was to sacrifice. Now, here is the typical excuse that people use of not only tithing, but going above their tithe. And that is this. Times are hard, and I must take care of myself first. The Macedonian church did not practice that. They did not believe that. In fact, they gave first before they took care of their own individual needs. And then there was the purpose of their example, where it says in verse 4 that they were begging us for the favor of taking part in the relief of the saints. So, here's a question. Why should I give to the ministry of the local church? The local church is where your tithe should go. I'm going to give you 5 things. Number one, the church has to pay its bills. There are power bills. There are electric bills. There are phone bills. There are repair bills that the church has to pay. You have to pay your salary of your pastor and his insurance for his family. You have to support your missionaries. You have to finance missions trips. You have to assist members during trials and times of financial hardship. And then there's the power of their example. And we see that in verse 5 of how, and this not as we expected, but they gave themselves first to the Lord and then by the will of God to us. Here's the key point. They gave of themselves first, and everything else is secondary. So here are some implications. Number one, give yourself to God. Repent, believe the gospel, rededicate yourself to God. Secondly, go from a tipper to a tither. Don't skimp out on God. Thirdly, allow God's grace to enable you to go beyond your tithe and give sacrificially. Let me challenge you to do that in the upcoming year of 2015. And that is, give to the Lord and His local church, the local church that you belong to, give to it sacrificially. God bless you. I hope you're having a great year of 2015. Happy New Year to you, and we'll see you next week on Growing Together with Christ.